right. Hello. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Infinite Wisdom Series. Welcome, welcome.
Yeah, we've got a wonderfully unique Infinite Wisdom show for you today. We've always loved our global community. So how about telling us where you're tuning in from? Because our special guest is coming to us from across the pond in Ireland. And I'm afraid to ask her exactly what time it is there. But we are still honored that she is so dedicated to bringing her message out at any time of the day or night. On the outside, today's guest looks like someone took a bunch of stuff and just put it in a blender. While on the inside, it's a very, very different story. After a degree in art and design, Deirdre Morrison began her career in PR and communications. And before going into develop several successful businesses and ventures herself. But the golden thread that Deirdre continues to pull at is the concept of learning and creativity, or in science speak, neuroplasticity. And you've heard us talk about that for years, and in how it shapes not just our individual lives, but the successes and failures of the entire human species. How can being more brain aware help us be more effective in all aspects of our lives? Like many things about the brain, there are simple answers to these questions, and there can be some pretty complicated answers. And while discovering the brain and its multi-dimensional operations is actually a journey without end, while what we've accepted for generations may actually not be the most accurate or insightful information currently available. So she founded the Neurodevelopment Institute to create awareness of useful applied neuroscience and evoke change on the personal and interpersonal level through collaborative efforts, and sharing this work where researchers, practitioners, and end users can come together to engage and exchange ideas and inspiration. And these engagements combine neuroeducation and neurotransformational coaching techniques in order to equip clients with the tools and understanding that they access their best thinking. That sounds familiar. So let's talk neurocreativity. So Deirdre, thank you so much for joining us.
It is my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So to start off, I think I mentioned that when you and I first met, synchronicity kind of stepped right in as we found each other. And because we both have, or all three of us, have a passion for Bruce Lipton's biology of belief. So what attracted you to its words and ideas?
It's actually quite some time now since I read it, but I remember I was going through a phase when that book came out, where I was looking at, just for fun, quantum physics, as you do,
Sure.
and understanding some and not understanding other bits, again, the way you do with quantum physics. So when I picked up that book, it seemed to explain things in a way that was very, I guess, appealing and very relatable. And it made me rethink certain things. I think that's maybe one of the reasons that I felt so fond of the book and so attached to it, because it was one of those books that made me stop and start to look at things again, and also to ask new questions. And for me, asking the right questions is really the best way to go about finding answers that we can work with. And because there are so many answers, it's never like there is one answer, but it's finding that key to ask the right questions so that we get the answers that can take us to where we want to go.
Great. I mean, it just makes you look at everything so much differently. And we are big proponents of questions and creating the right formulation of questions and questions. And you as a coach and counselor yourself, understand the real power of questions.
Mm.
That's one of Gary's favorite topics. I can tell you for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So you've been at this for how long?
Oh gosh. So it's really one of those fades. There's no sort of hard cutoff points really in this journey. So the learning and creativity, obviously that's run through my entire career. Then when my kids were little and I was picking up more on how they were learning and developing, and choosing their education path, which is an alternative path, that obviously led me to look more at how we learn, how we develop. I've been coaching for, I think, about 8 years now, and I've been moving more and more towards the applied neuroscience methods over the last, I'd say, 4 years or so.
Okay, so for our listeners who don't really quite understand that, explain that a little bit more if you could. The applied neuroscience aspect of it.
Sure. Yeah. So there are lots of scientists out there doing amazing work, helping us to understand the brain. But what tends to happen is that the work and the discoveries that they make, it's very high level, and it doesn't necessarily feel like it has any application to our day-to-day lives. And then when you get people who bridge that gap, very talented and dedicated people who are maybe in the coaching space or in the counseling space or whatever already, then they will take that research. And some of my teachers are among these people who are doing that. They're taking this research and they're looking at how that applies in day-to-day life. So they're looking at how we can take this concept that has come from a research paper or a study, and what lines we can draw between that and how somebody can use it when they go into work, when they go home to their families, or when they want to make a decision. So all of these things that we do every day, there are now tools that are informed by what we know about the brain that can help us have better show up better, show up more effectively, be more self-aware, be more conscious of what we're doing, so that these actions, reactions, and interactions that we take are actually the ones that will get us the results that we want.
So you're
or at
actually
least get us closer to them.
right.
So you're adding in the scientific part of, or the piece of the puzzle when you're doing a counseling or coaching session, so that they get that it's not just you pulling stuff out of the air.
Absolutely. Yeah. So personally, I find it really difficult to just go with things without understanding why they work. I like to know why things work.
Yeah.
So when I've studied other coaching modalities as well, and there was always a piece missing for me, and that piece was why. Okay, so I don't like to be told to just do something and it'll work. And therefore, I don't expect that my clients will enjoy that much either. So I like to be able to say, well, we're doing this because of this method. We're doing this because this part of your brain sees the world this way, and this part of your brain sees the world another way. Or we're doing this because when you are having a response to something, your body is coming into play in a certain way, and it is affecting how you are approaching this, or affecting how you can engage with it in the best way.
That's awesome. So just as a side note, just because I see some more people jumping on, if you're tuning in, please let us know in the chat where you're chiming in from, just so we kind of can see who you are and where you're from. But also, if any questions that you have, throw them in the chat. We will be responding to them and be as interactive as possible. So we do have.
Hey, Melanie. Hey, Joy. Jolene, how are you?
Hey, Jolene, haven't seen you in a while.
Exactly. Fantastic. Thanks everybody for joining us. Some regulars. What I find is that when I'm working with clients, and because Gary and I pretty much use the same type of approach, and you see sometimes they just kind of back off, like, oh, that's just a little bit too woo-woo for me, and I'm just like, yeah, but here's the research that says that it's not. And a lot of the research that is coming forward now, people thought was just all kind of, woo-woo crazy stuff, 20, 30 years ago. It's like, well, or even 2 centuries ago. And we're like, no, they're proving that all of this stuff actually works. There's just people who had these intuitions that just knew that this is it. Now you just know the details of how it is actually working in your brain, in your body, etc. And that's one of the great revelations that Dr. Lipton brought forward.
Yeah.
He brought forward that we've been practicing this for decades now, and now I'm showing you that it actually is real, that actually works. Let me show you my research. And that was groundbreaking. Still is.
I think one of the things that seems to happen is that there's a lag. Someone will make a discovery or have a hunch or find that something is working on the ground. And then there is that period where there just isn't enough research to absolutely say that this is why it's working or what's happening.
Right.
And it does seem to, there is that awkward teenage phase almost, where it's like, we haven't quite got a grasp on what's really happening here. And I think that some of the things that you're talking about that are coming into their own now in this space, they would definitely have been seen as on the woo-woo end of the spectrum, but we're seeing new conversations happening. And I was talking to someone recently, and she's been communicating neuroscience for 15 or 16 years. And I asked her what she thought was the most important thing that she'd seen happening in that time. And she said that it was the fact that we were now talking about emotions in a scientific context, which I thought was very interesting.
What did she have to say? Any specifics on that?
No, we didn't actually have time to get into specifics, but
that's okay.
I'll ask her next time I see her if you like.
But it's so true, and you see that when you bring this research forward, that people do settle in and they just kind of pay attention a little bit more. One of an interview that I was listening to from someone else, where they were talking with a neuroscientist, and
I think we
might have lost him for a second, have we?
For you too, yeah. He's in freeze mode. Let me just message him. I'd like you to kind of talk a little bit about the science around emotions and stuff like that, because that's something we talk about as well. Can you share some insights on that? So people, because I think that people fall into
and they had said idea. That
Ross, you blacked out for like a minute there, buddy. So all of what you just said, nobody heard. Well, he's there again. I'm going to message him on.
Okay.
I don't know here. So if you could do that, and I'll just talk a little bit about that, because I think that people have this idea that they don't have the ability to control their emotions, or it's like it's outside of their control or their capacity to be to not only expand their level, their amount of emotions they have, but also the depth and the juiciness of them.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if you guys have come across the work of a scientist called Lisa Feldman Barrett. Yeah. So I think some of the work that she's doing is absolutely phenomenal and really has shaken up the conversation and is so applicable and so easy and accessible, so easy for us to use. So basically, her work circles around this idea that emotions are not something that are hardwired into us, that are built into us, that they are actually created as part of a process in which the brain is doing its best to keep us safe. And all of these emotions that we generate are part of that process. So I find her work absolutely fascinating. And I think that probably understanding or reading some of what she's been doing it's been life-changing. There's no doubt about that, because she talks about this idea that, we see our emotions as responses, and we see them as, so-and-so did such and such a thing, and then I got angry. Whereas, in actual fact, a lot of the time we're going to a situation with some feelings already on what it is that we're going to experience.
Yeah, you talked about that in an interview that I heard. It's where we're going into it with a preconceived idea of how we're going to respond to it before it even happens.
Yeah. So, I mean, our brains are these massively analytical, statistical kind of machines. And this is how we learned language. We worked it out is sort of gathering up all the information, and then we pieced together the fact that this is how language worked. And we also do that with various situations. So if we have been in a similar situation before, our brain, and this is really paraphrasing a lot of stuff here. This is a very, very kind of shortcut version, but our brain goes, right, okay, what have I got in the banks that I've managed to survive before that is most similar to this? Okay, right, let me run that program. And that's sort of how we go about it. And this is all happening at a level that we're not even aware of. It's all happening so quickly. So understanding that that is what's happening, that is how we're making our decisions, and we're going into these actions, reaction, and interactions, then we can actually put that pause on it. And we can say, okay, well, I am feeling anxious about talking to this person because I'm worried about something that might happen. But I'm maybe making some assumptions about what's going to happen. So when we can actually think, right, hang on a second, do I know that this is going to happen? Or am I going in prepared for battle for some, for example, do I need to do this? Or what would happen if I got curious about it? What would happen if I went in a more open state of awareness, or an open state of mind?
Yeah.
So that's sort of where a lot of her work goes. And that's some of the things that we can then apply when we're working with clients is, okay, so let's look at this scenario and let's help to untangle what of this is actually real, what of this is actually prediction, and what can we do to make our approach better as we go into doing this.
Which is awesome, because one of the things we talk about all the time, and from day one in our programs and what we teach with our group here, is that it's not a this or that reality. It's a this and that and that and that and that. So we want to get people to a place of what we call the choice convergence point, and it's a point where
I like that.
Where all potential, all possible options and choices exist, and then operate from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that, the choice convergence point. That's great. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
When you can, and when you understand how things are working, and we're all about that, then people can get a pause. They can kind of like, okay, this is what I think is happening in my mind, in my brain, in my body, and such, and they'll pause. And we promote more of the observe, interpret, respond, so that there is that pause. They're not just they're not reacting, that emotional reaction that so many people are going into these days. It's just like just stay in the eye of the storm, watch the storm around you, but just stay calm, and instead of participating in the chaos. And it works very, very well.
Yeah.
You also talked about, go ahead.
Oh, I was actually just going to say, of course you have to bear in mind that some people kind of like the chaos.
Oh no, 100%. Yeah, because their neurochemicals are addicted to that, right?
Yeah,
right.
There's a stimulation from it for sure.
Exactly, right. You also talked about in something you talked about the rise and fall of an emotion, the wave of an emotion, and the Goldilocks. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that and share that concept with the audience.
The Goldilocks curve, that is from some work by Amy Arnsten, I believe is the scientist's name. So this concept of the Goldilocks curve is that we all have a cocktail of chemicals in our brain, but everybody's got a different point on that curve that is just right for them. That's why it's called the Goldilocks curve, because it's not too much, it's not too little, it's just right. And so you'll recognize that there are people who like a lot of excitement, they like a lot of stimulation, and they need to go skydiving before breakfast just to get their kicks. Whereas for other people, that would just be their worst nightmare, and they would rather be at home with a good book and a cup of cocoa, and that is exactly right for them. And I guess the thing is that we need to see that we have this huge mix of people. Everyone we meet has a different profile on that Goldilocks curve, and what is good for us isn't necessarily good for them. And by trying to, I guess, shoehorn ourselves into another mode, into another pattern, we are probably going to either over or understimulate ourselves. And in doing so, we're not going to be at our best, because we're going to end up either making bad decisions, or having other kind of brain fogginess. There's a whole kind of series of things that can actually show up there as the symptoms of being either over or understimulated. And actually, the thing I find really intriguing about it is that you can be both at the same time. So you can be really stressed and have too much to do, but that stuff can be really boring. So you can almost have two ends of the scale at the same time as well.
For sure.
That's great. So one of the things that you said, I read on your website, that you said that it exists to promote awareness of the changes we can make in our human potential. When you were talking about, I think you were talking about the Neurodevelopment Institute. How did that come about? Is that like a consortium of different coaches and researchers, or is it an actual, company? What is all that all about?
So we're quite a young organization. The Neurodevelopment Institute came about because some colleagues and I recognized the impact that understanding more about applied neuroscience had on our own lives, let alone on the lives of our clients. And it became something that we wanted to find a way to share more widely. So to create that awareness that could in turn evoke change ideally on a global level. We firmly believe that understanding more about how our brains are working will actually help us to make better decisions, to have more choices that aren't necessarily available to people who just don't have access to the information or the tools that we're using. It's not just about these particular tools. There are lots of ways of doing this. I think the real message here is that once we start to get that understanding of what is going on in this inner world and how that impacts our exchange with the outside world, then we can start to move forward as individuals and as a species.
That's awesome.
Well, I was talking with somebody yesterday, and I kind of brought you up a little bit, and then I was talking about some of the work that Gary and I do. And they were just, it was kind of a shock and awe. And I tried to simplify. It's like, listen, you just don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
And now what I have just done for you is I've just expanded. Now you're curious, right? And he's like, yeah, I'm very curious. I'm like, great. My job is done. So now that there's something else out there. And that there's different ways and there's different methods instead of just staying on this one path. We just took the blinders off. And instead of that path forward, you see all of this. And as what Gary said earlier, is that now you have this and this and this and this. You have all of these choices and such. And now you can choose. Just simply choose the ones that interest you the most in the beginning, and then follow those paths.
Yeah,
Seems
absolutely.
Like we're all kind of on the same page here as far as, trying to, let the world know that there's more than what they're just seeing. And in turn, that will absolutely change your reality. And we've tweaked things so much with our processes, that, we're showing people, like, we've had, instant transformations to where all of a sudden people are like, I'm just seeing things differently. I'm like, yes, you are, you stepped into another reality. And trying to knock away the preconceived things of what you see on TV or read in science fiction books is like, it can be very, very subtle, but it's a subtle change that's going to better your life in the long run, and it's compounded.
Yeah. I mean, those aha moments for sure, they are just, I mean, they're pretty much why I do this. Just seeing that happen for someone is unbelievable. But there are two phrases that I like to use when I'm working with someone over a longer period, and that's the archaeology and the architecture. And, you know, because the archaeology is what we come with. It's we're not born with it. We have it applied to us. So we have to kind of dig away at this little site to find out what it is that is there. So because there are structures that are there are beliefs, and there are, you know, old things that were useful at one point, but they've kind of been covered over, and we're, you know, they're still kind of bumpy, and, you know, they're there. So we can look at what is actually in that heap. And it's only really when we understand that we can start to put in the architecture, use the neuroplasticity to build the newer ways of doing things that are serving the person now. So I think we have to have an even hand on seeing both of those. I know there's, you know, the kind of opinion that you have to be always looking forward in coaching, but I remember listening to, I think it was Marsha Reynolds at one point, and she was saying, and it really resonated with me, that in order to have a good relationship with the future, we also need to understand the past and be at peace with that. So I think that we do need to look at both. We can't just shoot off and start building new structures. We actually need to understand what we're putting them on.
Exactly, the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but you know, so on that though, because when I hear that, I think, well, if how much do we put into that past if the past we're creating in the moment based on an idea of what happened, not actually what happened?
Well, I guess if you think about it, you know, the past that is being created in the moment is the only past that exists for that person, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So if that is what their experience and belief of that past is, then that's the one that we have to address. Got it. I'm sure there are other ways of doing this. I'm sure there are other people who would have different opinions on it. But if that person is sitting in front of me, then I'm not there to question whether that is their experience, and that's the experience that I'm working with.
Because that's what they're responding to anyways, is their perception of what happened, not what actually happened.
Yeah.
Got it.
And what type of...
Sorry, I was actually talking to someone recently, and, you know, I'll give an example actually of what I mean, but we were talking about the fact that she felt that she had not had a lot of encouragement or praise as a child. And that may or may not have been the case. I mean, I wasn't there, I don't know, but that was how she felt about it. And one of the things that we discussed in and around that was the negativity bias, and the fact that, you know, the brain is more likely to remember the things that feel like they are hurtful or critical, rather than all the praise that may have been heaped on her as a child as well. So just knowing that is in the landscape, but that there are ways that we can understand why it's in the landscape. I think that's maybe one of the tools that I like to use.
What are some of the other tools that you use when you're working with people?
So we do like to look at the differences between the hemispheres, left and right, and how they see and understand the world, the various networks in the brain and how they show up and when they activate and don't activate and so on. Also, you know, the connection between the body and the mind as well is something that is becoming more and more relevant, I think, as there's more work done on it. So, for instance, understanding the responses that go with the things that we're thinking or we're experiencing up here, but we're maybe experiencing somewhere else. Also, there's a model that I use, which is one that was created by Ann Betts and Ursula Pottinger, and they call it the the 7 levels of awareness. And this is it's a lovely, lovely model. And they this is really to help people understand the various states that we can be in. It's basically, it in itself draws on other work as well, but it shows us how we can move ourselves from one state of awareness or consciousness or effectiveness to others and more helpful states of awareness, but also understanding what the gifts and the benefits of each of the states are, whether or not they appear helpful at the time.
So what are those 7 levels of awareness?
So this is they range all the way from hopelessness to synchronicity, basically.
Cool.
So yeah, so it's really looking at everything that is within the human experience, and what it is how it is that we show up.
That's cool.
Really nice.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you started to talk about the 2 things. So you said there's the archaeology and then the environment. I don't think you finished off that piece. Can you
the architecture? Yeah. So in terms of the architecture, that's really where we're looking at where we are now and where we want to move to, what it is how it is that we want to be, how it is that we want to show up, and what it is we want to be seeing in our lives. And for a lot of people, this will be it might be redressing, marginal losses that they've sustained over many, many years in terms of their health or their relationships or their confidence or whatever. And getting to grips with that and understanding as well the level of work that needs to go into creating new neural pathways, that, goes into creating new habits, the energy and the emotional expenditure that is required to support this change. Much as we can have these instantaneous aha moments as people see and realize something that has been going on in their lives, there is also, it's like the title of that book, After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. And then we have to actually keep going. We have to be willing to stay the course and be self-compassionate as well in that, in making those changes, I think. And this is very important. One of the things that I see happening for a lot of people is that they have maybe built up a habit or a way of being or responding over maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever. And somehow they think that this is reversible in the course of a week. And if it isn't done in a week, that they are like, well, it's no point. I can't change that. But one of the things I ask people to do just to test this out, and to have another example so that they can see how this actually works, is to switch the hand that they brush their teeth with. Yeah. So it's like really, really simple, but you go, oh gosh, that's really awkward. And then you forget to do it sometimes, or you've already brushed your teeth before you realize, I was supposed to do it this way. And it's this, the curve where we go through a learning process. And first of all, where we don't know what we don't know, like you said earlier. Then we know what we don't know. Then we know a bit. And then, we eventually get to the stage where we become the habit, the new habit, and it is done without us thinking about it. And it is just guiding people through that and making sure that they don't leave it too soon.
So someone had mentioned, so Terry in the comments has mentioned in your discussion, how also including in your discussion, how are people self-regulating their vagus nerve? Is that something that you talk about or go into at all, or have any insights on?
So yeah, the vagus nerve is something that we do look at. I have to confess, it is not something that is a specialism of mine. One of my colleagues, he is very much au fait with the vagus nerve. And one of the things that he does is that he guides people through cold water swimming as a method for toning the vagus nerve. And so we know that there are other things as well, that you can do simple things like humming or whatever, and that will actually help to tone the vagus nerve as well. the vagus nerve is very, very important, and it's such a highway between the brain and the organs. So yeah, absolutely, it's it is a big deal in this applied neuroscience.
That's great. One of the things you mentioned also is, that some people, because, Ross and I get it too, because we've been doing coaching consulting for 30 odd years, is they want the drive-through version of change, right? They want to
Yep.
They want to come to the speaker box, tell what the thing is, and then drive to the box and then get their result, right? And I like to remind them there's so many variables. There's so many variables, and to think that one drive-through is going to work for everybody, or one recipe or one menu option is going to be the cure-all. I think that's partly because of societal conditioning, that we want things quick and we expect them quick and stuff like that. But I also think it's because people don't understand that there's levels to transformation, right? There's levels to making changes in your life. And while I say all of this, I'm not a component, or I'm not a believer that you can't ever have the drive-through experiences, but to expect that all the time, or to expect that in every scenario, I think is a little, unfair to yourself, right? Because you've got these different components that, right up to, and I think you talked about it in, I think you talked about in one of the, oh man, it was an interview that I heard you speak about, where the identity has a variable, and have such a powerful impact on the type of transformation or what you experience. And when you were talking about that, Ross and I share, what we call the 6 levels of transformation, markers of transformation, which stems off of Gregory Bateson's neurological levels, which, comes from the NLP realm and stuff like that. And, identity is, it's at the top of the tier, right next to a spiritual experience. Because when you have that spiritual experience, it doesn't always, but has the potential to ripple through your identity, your beliefs, your capabilities, your behaviors, and your environment. But people, they're working on their environment and expecting the identity to, and
there's a beautiful quote from Lao Tzu, and it goes something like this. He says, in order to become who we might be, we must let go of who we are. And I think, it's such a beautiful concept. And Napoleon Hill also actually talks about, this idea that nothing great happens without great sacrifice. And I think that, most people in this world that we have, in this culture and the society that we have, think that the things that you must offer as this great sacrifice are time and money and so on. But quite often, I think that what we have to let go of in order to see this transformation is what we believe ourselves to be. And that, for, we've created this identity, this container for ourselves over so many years. And for most of us, we have been honing that. And it seems like the only thing that we can really hold on to, that we can be sure of, and letting go of it, or inviting change into it, can be a very difficult thing. It takes a lot of courage to do that.
Yeah, because people are afraid of the unknown, right? And one of the things Ross and I talk about is you need to make the unknown your friend, because the unknown is more prevalent and constant and consistent than you give yourself credit for, because every moment is unknown. We don't know, but people they summarize that unknown scared to the transformation or the doing something, but we don't know moment by moment what's happening, or how we're going to create the continuity of a reality that we've had for so long, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you think about it, our relationship with life and death and our clinging is very much based on the fact that we do not know what happens next. We do not know where we're going. We lose, it is the ultimate loss of control for a human being. So that is, Yeah, there's another model that I also really like, and it was developed by a lady called Laurie Shook, and it's called Be Safe and Certain, and she talks about the various kind of factors that we want to have in good order in terms of our emotional well-being, you know, our sense of belonging, our sense of status, our what's fair and what's not fair, expectations, all of this kind of thing. And the last part of that for her is certainty, which I think doesn't really come up so often in other models, but I think it's a really useful one because we are always trying to make sure.
Yeah.
And again, it is that active surrender, if that makes sense, you know,
Yeah.
as opposed
I
to
call it living on the edge of bliss, because you never really want to get to bliss, because then what else is there, right? You want to live on the edge of bliss.
yeah. I think that they're living in the energy of the question is a way that I've heard it put as well, and I really like that too.
I like that.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice. All right, popping in and out, Ross.
Yeah, sorry about that. You know, you had mentioned that you have a storm over there in Ireland, and apparently it's affecting me. It's the butterfly effect. So
we have some big butterflies.
I don't talk about that anymore because it's like, what the heck is going on here? I mean, we had a storm last night, and I guess it's still wavering itself outside. It's kind of weird that we're having 95-degree weather, and you know, all of a sudden, this storm just came in. Last night, just caught everybody by surprise, but it's still out there. So stop it. But I apologize. But
just a little more uncertainty.
Yep, there you go.
Right.
That's right. So, but so I'm just kind of catching up here. So when when we see that people are in this current society, people are so stressed. And part of it is that certainty, and a lot of it as well is that they have this idea of how everything is supposed to happen. I want this, and this is exactly how it happens. And what we try to stress with the people in our programs is like, just let it go. It will happen. It'll happen the way you want it to happen, but maybe not in the way you think it's going to happen. But the end result will ultimately happen. Do you find the same thing with your clients as well?
Yeah, I think
I wanted this, but but it didn't happen the way I wanted it to happen. And it's like, but it happened. Yeah, but it didn't happen the way I wanted it to happen. It's like, but it happened. And they can't let go of that fact that they're, it's like you can't control the world. You can't control everything around you. Just let it go and just, keep the energy out there of this is what my intention is.
This is a really interesting one. One of the things that we touched on a little while ago is this this idea of certainty, and also this idea of surrender. And here we have this this notion of active and passive, but also being, we're kind of going to go a little bit woo-woo here, but in terms of the idea of abundant the idea of abundance or the idea of lack. If you imagine those as a line, when you are below that line, when you are in that state of lack, for want of a better word, if you are concerned about the things that you might lose, the consequences, the what other people are going to do or say, then that is really where that control is most active, in my experience. Right. Whereas once we get above that, whereas we take that step across that line, and we are feeling braver, and we are more able to engage and trust, then it's a whole different experience. And understanding that that one vision that we had of how things should happen is actually a little bit too rigid for the this new way of looking at things, and we can get beyond that rigidity. And actually we're talking about getting into flow at that point. We're talking about getting into
because when you're in that rigidity, there's no space for the synchronicities to show up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So why do you feel that the lack belief system is more prevalent than others?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, we have such a long history. You know, our current society didn't just emerge out of nowhere. It's been built up over time. So, you know, we could go back a long way before we would actually come to, we might never come to any conclusions about that. You know, in reading things like Ian McGilchrist and his book, The Master and His Emissary, and also work by people like David Wengrow and David Graeber, who wrote The Dawn of Time, or sorry, The Dawn of Everything. You know, when you start to match up the ideas in these books and you look at the differences between the left and right hemisphere and the kind of ideas and cultural kind of changes that we've had over the centuries, and we have sort of ended up in this society where we like to quantify things. We like things that can be defined, and you know, it is quite a rigid system in many ways, and it sort of leans into the way the left hemisphere sees the world. So if we are in that kind of rigid, I mean, don't get me wrong, the left hemisphere has many, many wonderful strengths. And what we need to be doing is working those two hemispheres together in a more integrated way. But when we lean in one direction or another, where we start to, you know, become that rigid thinker, we start to see it as me and mine, we start to see it as black and white, we start to not look at the bigger picture and have the empathy that would come with more right hemisphere thinking.
So do you instill types of training with your clients that increases that communication between the course the book is awesome?
Yes, absolutely.
What things? I mean, I like to use binaural beats myself to assist in that. But what do you recommend for a lot of your students?
So some of the things that we would look at is creating metaphor that is actually working across both hemispheres. Now, metaphor is just such a powerful tool, and I don't think that it's been fully explored yet. I think, but it is something that can really give opportunity to, you know, both of those sides to talk to each other and to offer up their wisdom and their gifts and form an alliance in actually generating something new. And it's in the generation of something new that we actually can move forward. You know, it's I don't know if you've ever come across the work of a woman called Mary Parker Follett. She was a social reformer back in the day, like we're talking the start of the 1900s. And she had this idea that was really prescient about, you know, what we know about the brain now. And she would say that if you went into a meeting, there were 4 possible results and 3 of them were wrong. So the first one that was wrong was that you got your own way. The second one that was wrong was that you didn't get your own way. The third one that was wrong was that you reached a compromise. That doesn't really leave many options, does it, in our normal way of thinking? But what she said was the right way to actually come away from that engagement, that meeting, was to create something entirely new around that table.
Nice.
Yeah, so that everybody around that table was vested in it, that they had contributed, that nobody felt that they had conceded or given way or been ridden roughshod over.
It's a win-win.
Win-win in the truest sense of the word. And everybody has created this new brainchild. That's
brilliant. Now I'm gonna have to pick up her book because that sounds fascinating.
Actually, there's a really good one. It's called The Power of Giving Power Away by a guy called Matthew Barzun. And I would strongly recommend that, as with a great synopsis of Mary Parker Follett in it.
All right, fantastic.
Yeah, you talk about metaphors and how powerful they are. Ross and I, we have a master lab training that we're going to be putting on in the next few months, or near the end of the year, called creating your own life story, or rewriting your life story. And it's about looking at how the metaphors that you grew up with impacted who you've become today without you even knowing it, right?
Yeah.
And then
Absolutely.
once you understand that, because you talked initially about understanding and being awareness first, once you understand that, then in the present moment, with your knowledge and experience and your current level of wisdom, choose new metaphors to write the future, so that you can step into who you want to be instead of who you were, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, that use of language is so important. And culturally, we are we notice things at this side of the pond that, you know, are very typically here versus very typically you guys, right? So here in Ireland specifically, if someone says, "How are you?" the answer will be "not too bad." So let's unpack that one for a minute, will we?
Oh yeah, I hear it already.
Oh,
Jumps for me.
So you know, just even noticing that this is part of the cultural landscape is really important, because then you can say, okay, hang on a second, not too bad, right? Is that the best we can hope for? So, and you know, if typically if I ask one of my American friends, "How are you today?" "Oh, I'm great." It's a completely different way of approaching that a question. Now, whether or not they are, or whether they're just telling me that they are, that's another matter, and that's something else to dig into. But it's that idea that we will put that best foot forward, as opposed to whatever's going on, I'm going to just hide behind this little, you know, this protective shield of not letting you know.
Yeah, that reminds me now, next week's interview is with Laurel Erica, and she has a process called word magic, and all about the words. And I heard her give a speech, and I was just fascinated by, you know, I mean, there's things that she was teaching me. I'm just like, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, why, you know, but we become these words, and Gary and I teach this all the time, is the words make you. They make your future, they make your day, they make your future. And they can reinforce the past as well. And so I'm listening to her talk, and you know, she not only is very precise in the words that she uses, but she goes back into, this is where the word originated, and then how it just kind of mutated as you know, society and has progressed. It's going to be a real fascinating interview. You should jump on. And
I would love to, yeah.
But we did Gary, was it January of this year? We did a 4-part series on words. And it's probably the 4 most popular shows we've had.
Yeah. And this is one of the things as well, you know, that when we are working with someone else, someone who has maybe had a different cultural experience, had a different background, had a different way of using language, you know, these are things that are not fixed. These are things that are not uniform across geography, across cultures, across languages. And going back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, you know, this idea of emotion, again, these are not fixed. That, you know, the way emotions are expressed are not fixed. We can't take them for granted that what, you know, we're seeing opposite us, we are reading correctly. So yeah, that's another really fascinating one, and you could spend a lifetime just so
there's something that I say all the time is, the words you use are either declaring your reality or they're invoking one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And
so
this is the thing,
they're either declaring the reality you experience, or they're invoking a reality that you experience.
And you know, the brain is listening. It's taking in those words. It doesn't turn off. So the words that, and again, you know, we have a lot of the inner critic, the infamous inner critic. You know, where's my inner cheerleader? Bring her out for a while. Let's get something a little bit more positive going on in here and see. But again, back to that negativity bias, you know, when we are paying attention to the words that we are saying to ourselves, we're actually missing out on the opportunity to say better things to ourselves. We're missing out on the opportunity to build that positive awareness, to build that better state of being and way of approaching the world.
Yeah, I want to put a little more emphasis on that statement, where, because I saw it in some of your work somewhere, and I used it many times to promote this interview, that we all have this inner critic, but where's our inner cheerleader is exactly what you said. And it just really, it's a very simple thing to remember and keep in mind, because you're like, well, yeah, why can't I have a cheerleader? Why can't I have it? Why do we think that the cheerleader has to be from outside of us?
Yeah.
And
well, sometimes it does help to actually co-opt a cheerleader. If you're not comfortable being your own cheerleader. Actually, this is something I was thinking about earlier today, because someone was talking about writing in the third person, and that can actually be a really helpful friend, if you step outside and become that observer and write about yourself in the third person. But additionally, and I've worked through this with a lot of clients as well, if you were to look to the people that you admire, the people that you have actually that you aspire to being like, and I remember one client saying that, Oprah was one of her heroes, and she was going through some process. She was going through some time in life. I can't exactly remember the details, but I said, okay, so, if you were sitting in your boardroom and Oprah walked in the door and you asked her that question, what would she tell you? Yeah. And the thing is, she knew instantly what advice she would get from Oprah. Yeah. And that was the advice that she needed at that time. So the thing is, we don't have to be for ourselves if we're not ready to be that, but we can invite other people to be it for us, even if they are not there.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway.
I do a process with some clients, depending on scenario, obviously, where I get them to come up with like this council, if you will, of people that they respect. And then I get them to say, okay, now from that person's perspectives, from that person's perspective, from that person, and I get them to see from all these other perspectives of how those people would respond or give feedback and share for them. And we call it Knights of the Round Table. And so we have them we have them sit in the middle of the Knights of the Round Table, and then they get all this stuff from so they're like, what's his name? What's the guy? Knights Round Table. I got a mental blank. So he's in the center, and then all the knights are around, just kind of giving that, and then from there becomes the choice convergence point where the choice can come from there, right?
Yeah. That's right, and because we can invite so many people to that table, and they can help channel those the potential that we already have and the wisdom that we already have.
Yeah,
it's phenomenal. Okay, so Deirdre, we're kind of nearing the end of the show. We've got just a couple more minutes. Are there any last things you'd like to say to our audience? Websites? You were saying something that you have a book reading coming up. Tell everybody about that and invite them in, and so we can share the knowledge.
Thank you. Yeah. So my colleagues and I at the Neurodevelopment Institute are doing a series of readings or reading groups. And if you are interested at all in understanding more about how insight happens, and I think this is, knowing how insight happens and knowing more about how that works in our brain is obviously a great thing to have. We will be reading between here and the 13th of September, Gary Klein's book, Seeing What Others Don't. So if you want to pick up a copy of that and head on over to neurodevelopmentinstitute.com/read, then you can find out more about the event and maybe join us. That would be great. And if you want to find out more about what I do, you can either jump on my podcast, which is ambitionincubator.com, or come over and visit me at the neurocreative.studio. That's neurocreative.studio.
All right. And now is that event it's a one-day event? So read the book, and then before that date?
Yeah, so it's going to be on the 13th, Tuesday, the 13th of September. So we will have just about a 90-minute session where we bring a small group together, and we will look through some of the highlights in the book and then exchange ideas. So this will be a live conversation, much like the TED Circles concept. So everybody will have the opportunity to bring to the table what they found from it, maybe, other insights that they have from their other work or readings, and really just share with a group of interested people.
Another Zoom call. I'm looking at the page right now. So that sounds very interesting.
Well, we'd love to have you there.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. The time is going to be really kind of difficult.
8 p.m. I think that's about 12 noon, isn't it, for you?
I'm just teasing because you stepped up and made our time frame, so that's awesome. Okay, so that's about it. I encourage everybody to look up Deirdre's website and get on these book readings. Is this the first book summary that you've done?
Yes, this is the first in this series. Okay. So I will also be migrating the TED Circles to the Neurodevelopment Institute in about October time. So if you are on that site, if you're signed up for notifications or whatever, you will get the details of any of the future TED Circles as well. And they're free events. So everybody's welcome.
The TED Circles are where you basically put up a TED speaker and then talk about what he or she is speaking about, correct?
Yeah. So we normally take 15 minutes at the start. We co-watch. So everybody watches together. You don't have to do any preparation for this one or anything. And then we look at what that has brought up for us, what it's meant, what other concepts and ideas are attached to it for us. And they're generally absolutely riveting discussions.
All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you so very, very much for joining us today.
For being such gracious hosts.
Oh, it's our pleasure. We love to learn ourselves. And thank you everybody for joining us. If you're watching this on the replay, please put in your questions. We will get back to any questions. And if something stumps us, then we'll forward that on to Deirdre, and she can possibly help you in that direction. We strongly encourage you to check out our website. Definitely check out this book summary program and her so the TED Talks are critiques or just discussions?
Just discussions. It's really, it's all about getting curious about a lot of different topics that, we come at from different perspectives.
All right. Well, okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Have a great day.
Well, you made it to the end of this interview, and that tells us one thing. You liked what you heard, and maybe, just maybe, you might want more of the same. So be sure to hit subscribe and ring that bell. As a matter of fact, you might be ready to step things up for yourself. You see, everyone that you've heard us interview for the Infinite Wisdom series all have one thing in common. They've harnessed their own potential, claimed their badass self, and raised their game and leveled up. Whether it be in business, personal, romantic, for whatever aspect of life you choose, there's always a next level. So we encourage you to rekindle your passion and purpose, step it up, and register for our next free 5-day Badass Challenge. The link is below, and we are excited to see you take a leap into a new reality that only you can imagine.